yet.
Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to this in-person meeting here at the Office of Economic and Workforce Development in San Francisco. We're appreciative of the host, OEWD, and I want to turn over the mic to Orion, who's made this possible here in this location.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Vince. I just wanted to welcome everybody to our office. I work on a team here at OEWD called TechSF, where we have an American apprenticeship grant from the DOL to implement registered apprenticeships locally in the tech industry. It's been a learning experience, and we're really excited to have all of you experts in the room to kind of, glean knowledge from. Just want to thank you guys for putting this together. And we hope that this leads to a fruitful discussion and to keep the conversation going locally, statewide, and nationally. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. As you can tell, we're doing a podcast at the same time. This is not, we're not New America or AEI, our friends who are also on. So our production values are a little more modest, but we're into guerrilla podcasting all the same. So thank you for those of you who've joined us online. And what I want to do is give a few opening remarks, and then we're going to hear from the two panelists to my right. First of all, again, thanks for hosting us here at OEWD. I want to thank Amabel and Joshua and of course Orion for hosting us. I think it's actually quite poignant that we're right here because we walked over from Twitter, and if you think about it, these are all disruptors. This is about the future of work. This is about a new way of doing business. And it is also a question of innovation. And what do innovative companies look for if not talent? So the question is, how do we prepare talent as a society? What do we do to make sure that organizations, companies have talent, and how do we get them ready? And that's sort of one of the reasons we're here to talk about that. It's also poignant to be talking about this on the 18th of December, because it is 20 days until we have a new governor in California. And this governor said that we should have 500,000 apprentices in California. That's a tall order because we have about 84,000 right now. So when you talk about that kind of exponential growth, that obviously means we have to do not just tweak the system a little bit. We're really talking about a whole new approach to doing this work, this talent development work. So for all those reasons, I think it's again, kind of a good place to be. And of course, the governor happened to have been mayor of the city before. So again, another reason there's a connection here. I feel fortunate about the fact that we have here the CEO of CEMETS. CEMETS is the Center
on the Economics and Management of Education and Training Systems.
Thank you. That's really why I brought her here, so she can spell out. So this is an institute attached to the Swiss version of MIT. And we feel fortunate. We're going to talk a little bit about the Swiss system. We didn't pick the Swiss system because it's pretty and because Switzerland's a pretty place and because of the chocolate or the fondue. It turns out Switzerland is much more similar to the US than you think. And we're going to talk a little bit about those systems and why they're similar. I can say that because I spent half of my life there. Katie, who's here, has spent the last 6 years in Switzerland. So we feel like we are actually authorized to make these kinds of observations about the similarities. And they matter because finding a system that works, again, to go to scale, you have to look around the world and say, what is a system that could allow us to get to 500,000 apprentices, for example? And 500,000 apprentices is actually a very reasonable goal if you apply some of the rules that have been studied widely that, in particular, the Swiss have been practicing. So for that reason, again, that's one of the reasons why Switzerland makes sense. Katie has all sorts of good graphs and important information about, again, the other parallels. The two other observations that I'd like to make about it are Switzerland and the US are actually sister republics. The Swiss copied the US system of government, with the exception of the presidency. They made some tweaks to that. I would say economically, they're also very similar. Very liberal open market system, free market system. And what's also interesting is that in some ways, this idea of having a system that is not subsidized, that is not government run in a traditional sense, not like other European countries, for example. Again, that's a pretty good fit between. And then the third final sort of similarity is that if you look at the federal, state, and local rules, how local control actually is that we celebrate in the US, again, a very similar system on a much smaller scale. And it turns out if you actually extrapolated what the Swiss are doing to California size, you'd end up between 500 and 700,000 apprentices for California. So again, this is not sort of complete blue sky thinking only. So that's all I'm going to say about sort of the opening remarks. I would like to mention, of course, one of the reasons that we also brought Bob Lanter here is not just because he's a fabulous leader of the California Workforce Association, and therefore a very important person, but also because he was my colleague who joined me to go to CEMETS last year, or this year actually, we're still in 2018. And so we are going to share a few of our observations, what we learned, because I think that's going to be instructive. And the reason we talk about the Institute next year, and again, this is the reason why we're talking about Switzerland, it's one of the few places, and it's the only place really that has, I think of it as Hogwarts for workforce development folks, where the wizardry is focused on equity and figuring out how to develop talent at scale. And it's very scientific. It's not magic, really. In that way, it's different from Hogwarts. But it is you know, a place where people come together from all over the world to study. How can we do this well? How can we improve things? And it's always interesting for us here in California to not measure ourselves against Kentucky, nothing against Kentucky, but against, you know, Germany and Singapore and Japan, and have some yardsticks that actually, for an economy the size of California, make sense. So without further ado, I'm going to see if I can share slides here, since we do have some slides. If I can find the slide. There we go. I'm going to go to the beginning. Always good to start there. I want to make sure that I'm not showing this the wrong way. Okay, that should work. You'll tell me whether it's correct once it shows up. Oh no, it's not correct. All right. We'll get there. All right, here we are.
That's it.
All right.
Okay.
And I think first up, so we're going to do this in 3 parts, if my system cooperates. Okay, I cannot advance slides right now. That's interesting. There we go. It's just a little behind. We're going to talk about this in 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about the business case for apprenticeship, because again, some of you have seen this probably before, have seen parts of this presentation before, so bear with us. I know that every time I hear Katie talk about it, I get new insights, and I've heard it a few times, but I don't mind. Then we'll talk about the reform case for California in particular. It so happens that a new paper came out today. I'm really excited about it. I'll tell you more about it. And then we'll talk about an overview of the Institute and sort of how do you, if you want to be there or if you want to support someone who goes there, what would be the way to do that. So the business case is Katie's domain. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right. So the reason we're talking mainly about the business case and not about why this is important for students is that it's pretty clear to all of us that this is something that's beneficial for students. Having more options, having the opportunity to be prepared for a career as well as an academic education, creating a system that's permeable, that's transparent, that allows people to start from any starting point and end at any end point. All of that is very valuable. But if we're doing it through apprenticeship, especially through youth apprenticeship, companies have to be involved, which means we need to understand why this matters for companies. And most of us in my research group, most of us are economists. And so we tend to look at this pretty quantitatively and from the company point of view. Because if you're an economist, there's a big question of why should companies participate in this? Why should companies offer training? And so I'll try to give you the very large scale view of why that is. And then later we'll have Q&A. So if there's something that sticks out to you, let me know, because I could talk for hours, but I'm not supposed to. So.
And I should probably just mention, if you're online, you have a Q&A function, ask your questions online and submit them. If you have questions here in the room, raise your hand or wait until we get to the question and answer point. That's fine too, but you don't have to wait. If you're dying or if Katie is not making sense.
Especially if I'm not making sense. Yeah, I'm fine with taking questions. So the graph you see now is based on the job market monitor in Switzerland. And I'm going to be using Swiss data. We're not copying and pasting anything. We have projects in about 30 countries, so we can talk about things that are going well and not so well in other countries. But I'm going to use data from Switzerland because I have that at my fingertips. I'm not saying you should become Switzerland, it's just inspiration. So this is what job ads in Switzerland have been asking for since 1950. And it's a study that's been going on at the University of Zurich for a long time. And you probably can't see that little text at the bottom that explains what all the different lines are. But the first thing that we need to look at is that big red line that's going down. And that is sort of this minimal education, just only compulsory, ending school as soon as you possibly can, age 16. Not a lot of job ads are searching for that right now. In 1950, a fair amount were, but the job market has changed and that is not the situation anymore. The purple line that sort of goes through the middle is vocational education and training. Vocational education and training, sometimes abbreviated VET or VET, I may say that in this thing. That is the high school apprenticeship, the youth apprenticeship. And 70% of Swiss young people choose to do an apprenticeship instead of academic high school. And the system is built such that those people can end up with anything from a PhD, vocational education and professional education and training. And there's a lot of levels and transition opportunities in between. So the system's fully permeable, but most young people start with an apprenticeship. So that is about 50% of jobs in Switzerland are looking for that. And a lot of people in Switzerland, that's what they have. Switzerland is not a country with a lot of poverty. Education is obviously not the only factor involved in that. But these people are doing okay. They're earning living wages, working jobs that match their skills. They're doing fine. The green line that starts at the bottom and goes up at the end, that is tertiary or higher education. And that is the job market that we've all seen with technological change, that university educations are increasingly valuable, but it's still only about 40%, a little bit higher, 45% of the job market. We don't need every single person to have a college degree. We don't know whether that line is going to start leveling off or carry on. We don't know what's going on there, but we do know that it's not everyone. And you don't have to start in academic high school to get tertiary education. There's universities of applied sciences, which are kind of, sort of like a CSU situation, a little more applied. And then there's obviously traditional universities that are, big research universities like the UCs. So there's a lot of different kinds of tertiary education as well. That blue line that is absolutely going crazy at the very end, that is experience. And we know that. It's the cartoon we've all seen of, I need 3 years of experience to get the job, but how am I supposed to get experience until I can get the job? It's that classic catch-22. Well, an apprenticeship is experience. It's 3 years of job experience before you're 18, which is phenomenal. So experience is vastly valued because it covers all of those soft skills and transferable skills and 21st century skills. I know that you're going to show up on time. I know that you're capable of working in a workplace. Experience is obviously super valuable. And then soft skills is explicitly soft skills mentioned in the job ad is that orange line. So soft skills and experience are super valuable. Where do we get soft skills and experience? Can I advance you?
Please.
Oh, sorry. How do we best gain employability, experience and employability skills? The answer in Switzerland for young people who are trying to get their first jobs, getting into the labor market, is through apprenticeships. And this is the result of a survey we did in Colorado. We've done this survey in a number of other places. We asked a few thousand, I think a few hundred responded, the usual, companies in Colorado, how important sort of the top 16 soft skills are and where the best place to learn those. Colorado has a phenomenal apprenticeship initiative going on right now. through CareerWise Colorado, but this is asked before anybody started training. So these are not companies that are excited about training or anything. These are companies where most of the questions in the survey were about, you know, how hard is it to find skilled workers? How do you find skilled workers? It was kind of a pre-test kind of survey. But what we see is almost every skill, according to employers, is better learned in the workplace than it is in school. The two skills on the left in that blue half that are better learned at school, according to companies, are communication and advanced math. So reading, writing, and arithmetic, which we all know. Schools are great at that. But everything else, trustworthiness, reliability, efficiency, problem solving, all of those things are better learned in the workplace. And that makes a certain amount of sense because when it comes to working together with a group, there's a different set of skills involved in working with a group that's of diverse ages and people who have diverse occupations, a group sort of across different parts of your organization. That's a different skill set than working with 4 other 15-year-olds who are also students. Group work is great, and it's a good step towards that, but it's sort of the woodshop version of doing real work with diverse groups in the workplace. Woodshop is not the same as owning a carpentry company, and group work is not the same as working with people in the workplace. And you get a lot out of that group work. So,
and can I just interject? So this slide here was one of my aha moments when I was in Switzerland. Because here in California and across our country, we put so much emphasis and responsibility on the education system. So, you know, they watch our children, they teach our children, they feed our children, and now we're expecting them to teach our children how to work. And it's just not meant for that. And here in Colorado, the companies were saying, soft skills we teach, right? And I would be curious to see, and you're saying that's true all along.
It's been true in a number of other countries. I would assume if other countries are also on board, then California and Colorado are probably pretty similar.
Yeah.
And this is really important, what you were just saying, moving companies from that position of consumers of skills, where they sit and wait for education to produce them, to co-producers of skills. And this is saying, look, you're already doing this. Let's make it official. You want to talk about this one?
No, I want you.
Well, this is the statement of the problem. In California and in most of the US, the formal education route is sort of one column. It's high school, college, and if you want to keep going, more university-related things. That pipeline is pretty leaky. This slide shows a really sort of discouraging picture where for every 100 ninth graders in California, only 12.2 of them are earning a 4-year degree. And our education system is built on, it's predicated on the idea that everyone should be getting a 4-year degree. Now, we already saw that only about 40% of jobs require a 4-year degree. So we're setting ourselves up for a lot of skills mismatch, which is, there's this indicator that's internationally collected. Other countries collected, the ILO reports its skills mismatch, both horizontally and vertically, and the US doesn't collect it systematically, and I would love to see that data. Nerd sidebar. But this is a problem. This isn't acceptable. This isn't equity. Pushing 100% of those kids into a 4-year degree wouldn't be equitable either, because then what do they do once they get out into the world? So one part of the answer to this, and this is not a one-dimensional problem, but one part of the answer to this is having a permeable system. And permeability is two-dimensional. It's access, which we're pretty good at here. You can start college after a lot of different life experiences. You can get your GED in a number of different ways. We're pretty good at access, but we don't have a lot of diverse, different opportunities. We have that one column. What if we had a matrix? What if we had 2 columns? Where if we said you can start with an apprenticeship, you can do university or a CSU after having done, sorry, university and CSU is the same thing in the US. But you can go to college after having done that. You can go to academic high school, and then after you've gotten some work experience, you can do professional education and training. And so having options as well as access that enable people to pursue more, and having a program in high school so that if you know you're not going to college for whatever reason, it doesn't feel like a waste of your time to graduate high school. Because high school can be more than college prep. Secondary education can be more than just getting ready for university, because that's not right for everyone, and that's okay. Do you have more you want to add to that?
Nope, I think it's terrific.
Okay. This is my favorite slide, and this is the one that I'm not going to talk about for 2 hours. Okay. So this is, so first a story. This is the cost-benefit model for apprenticeship. This is how companies earn money by training. In Switzerland, companies overall earn money by training. I think the ROI on average is about 8%, which is a pretty good ROI for an investment. And that's in a 3 or 4 year training period. On the x-axis, that's the duration of the program. So that's that 3 or 4 years. And when this first study was done that calculated the costs and benefits of training for companies in Switzerland, and it found that they make money by training, right at that moment, there was also a debate going on in Switzerland about whether the government should start subsidizing training, start paying companies to train. And everybody who had a lot of experience was like, no, 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 don't do that, that's not good. But politically, it sounds good, you know? So people who aren't super familiar with the system were like, yeah, maybe we should do that. Well, this study landed on the desk of Ursula Reynolds. She's my boss, and she's she was in charge of the vet system in Switzerland for about 20 years. And she was able to take that to all the politicians and say, look, don't do this. Don't start subsidizing companies, because they're already making money by doing it. And there's a lot of reasons that subsidies would be damaging to that. One of the biggest ones is that not every company trains, because not every company should train. If I am running a really advanced laboratory of some kind, or a think tank, and everybody there has a PhD, an apprentice is only going to bring us coffee. That is not a valuable experience for the apprentice. That's not valuable for my company. If the apprentice doesn't have work to do, then the apprentice isn't learning, and it's not profitable for the company. If we give the company a bunch of money and encourage them to train, then we have apprentices who are sweeping the floors and bringing coffee, and we don't want that. So not only did that give politicians a way to have an evidence-based discussion about what they should be doing next with the system, all of a sudden, the author of that study, Schiff and Volter, started hearing a lot from like HR people in companies who were saying, this system is so important to us, and we just got a new CEO, and he's not Swiss, and he's been saying we should get rid of the system, and now I can say it's profitable. It gave them a language to talk to the people above them about why this is something that's important. So let's go over how it works. Okay, so the gray line that's just a straight diagonal, that's the costs of training. Those are the apprentice's wage, which goes up over time, which is why it goes up. The cost of the trainer's time, it's not going to be all of the trainer's time, their whole salary, but it'll be whatever time they spend training the apprentice and not doing their regular job. And it's the cost of equipment and materials. If you have a CNC machine, which is one of those cool milling machines that makes like three-dimensional parts, if a school has to buy one of those to put in a CTE lab, that costs like $1 billion approximately. But a company has one of those, and they can take it off the production line for 15 minutes for the apprentice to learn, and that's a lot cheaper. And the company's going to have the top of the line one. The school is going to be working with the same CNC machine for 20 years. And those change actually pretty fast. So that's another reason it's so important to have collaboration between schools and workplaces. The returns to training are made up of the apprentice's contributions on skilled and unskilled work multiplied by their productivity, which is part of the reason it goes up, because they get way more productive on skilled work over time. And it's also saved hiring costs. And that happens after this graph sort of shows that saved hiring costs can be super important. If you're a company who knows that your apprentices are going to stay, like for example, in Switzerland, the military, there's not a lot of other opportunities to be an F-16, I think it's 16, mechanic. So they know their apprentices aren't going anywhere. They spend tons of money. They lose money on training because they know that this gives them a quality employee in the future. Other companies where they know the apprentices are going to leave, or they want their apprentices to leave for whatever reason, some of them earn a lot of money. In Switzerland, electricians, those apprentices earn tons of money for their host companies. And so as a result, there's a number that go through. And we were talking about this at lunch. A lot of Swiss police officers are electricians, because you have to do an apprenticeship to go to police academy. And their electricians are always hiring. And so a lot of our police officers are electricians, just in case you happen to be in trouble with an electronic device in Switzerland. There's a lot more that goes on with this slide, but one thing that we really need to talk about is how we modify this. Imagine that the duration of the program was shorter, so that right-hand vertical dotted line was moved to the left. All of a sudden, companies are not breaking even. If you have a 6-month program, or if you have a program, Switzerland, there's 3- and 4-year programs, and it's defined by how expensive it is to train. It's what it takes to get companies to that end point. So if you move that line around, if you move it too far to the right, we start exploiting the apprentice. And if we move it too far to the left, companies are losing a lot of money. Yeah?
I think that was a bit of an aha moment for me when we studied this back in Zurich, because we often hear companies saying, I can only spend 6 months on training. I can't spend more time. And I think what they're missing here is that part of the time at the in the second half of the graph is actually a recovery period where you're making money back. And it turns out that's still an important learning period, because let's face it, if we've ever started a job in the first year or in the first 6 months, we certainly didn't figure out everything. And so getting to that 3-year point is actually kind of crucial. And not squeezing everything into the first 6 months actually means that your costs also go down in terms, and obviously your productive output as a percentage of your time spent in the company goes up. So it's kind of an important thing.
And I would just add that this is why a high school student makes economical sense. In California, we do a lot of adult apprenticeship work. Ex-offenders, people, low-income individuals, they need to work. They don't have 3 or 4 years to spend in an apprenticeship program. And our outcomes that are federally funded and state-funded programs don't give us that time either to show a cost per benefit with outcomes. So a 3 or 4 year apprenticeship program is excellent for a high school student who doesn't need extraordinary wages to be self-sufficient, allowing the companies to turn profits quicker. So as Katie said, this isn't just by happenstance. This is very well thought out and planned.
That's super important because, yeah, it's moving that gray line up and down. If you're 30 years old, which is the average age of a registered apprentice in the US, I think in California you said it's 27, you have car payments and maybe a family, and you can't make $1,200 to $1,500 a month. But if you're 15 and you're making $1,200 to $1,500 a month, you are doing great. That's way better than babysitting money. And not only is it way better than babysitting money, it also helps if there's a family where they're relying on young people for income or for childcare. That gives the family the wiggle room they need to let the student actually pursue more educational opportunities. So it's an equity factor as well in a lot of ways. One more thing on that. We can move every part of this around, which is really cool. 2 more things. So the first one is, what if we started our students at the bottom left corner? What if we started them at a lower ability level? Then it takes a lot more effort to get them up to that higher level, and we might have to change the model. What if we started them at higher ability level? So this has to be a program. It's a program for everyone, including the best students. And different companies have different definitions of ability because it's about skills matching. Some companies want someone who's excited about their company and their industry, and they'll get them the rest of the way there. Some companies feel really paternal about their apprentices, and they're like, I recognize that person. I was like that when I was 15, because a lot of 15-year-olds are like that. And I want to help that person become who they could be. I'm the right role model. Some companies are all about those super high achievers, especially like certain tech companies in Switzerland. They're just like, yes, grades are my definition of achievement. Let's do this. So different companies have different versions of the high enough bar, and it's diverse, which is great, but it has to be high enough. This is not a program this isn't a second chance program. And it's not a program for the people who aren't good enough for academic school. That's not how it works. In Switzerland, some of our best students are in apprenticeship. It has to be a program for everyone, and that has to be long enough. And then the last part is that actual S-curve of the line. We need to make sure that students are learning that much. And that's where it's really important to have an occupational curriculum that has to define learning objectives and tell the companies, you must get you have, let's say, 100 competencies in the program. 50 of them are the school's responsibility, 50 of them are the company's responsibility. However they get it done, there's going to be an exam at the end, possibly one in the middle, and they have to pass that exam. You can teach them anything extra on top of that you want, but they must master these competencies. And so companies end up investing a lot to teach extra skills. If you're what's an occupation? If you're an electrician, you're going to have to learn the general everything skills. But if your company specializes in high voltage installations for high rises, they're going to teach you all that stuff too. And that's extra skills that's more advanced, and it's better for the company, it's better for the student. That was enough talking about that.
We're going to probably get to the commercial employee, which is an interesting occupation as well, and how it is defined in Switzerland.
Yeah, and this is just the numbers for Switzerland. Companies spend I think it's $5.35 billion every year on apprenticeship, and they earn $474 million back from that. So they get, I think it's about
close to 10,
8 or 10%.
Yeah.
I'm great at mental math. yeah, so companies make money by training. That's why companies participate in training. That answers the question because it's good for their bottom line. And if we build a system where it's good for companies, then it's good for everyone, and then it works. And then it's not philanthropy. And as soon as there's an economic downturn or the company next to them starts poaching away all their trained people, they don't mind because they already earned back their investment. Okay.
One quick question for you. In order for this to work, what percentage of employers in a saturated system, which I guess you could call Switzerland saturated when it comes to apprenticeship, what percentage of companies need to be participating as training companies?
Not all of them, not even a majority of them. In Switzerland, it's about 30%. We just need the companies who have the work for it and who are in the right industry. If you're doing something that's absolutely brand new, never been done before, there is no occupation. I don't know if you're doing, let's say we make contact with aliens next week and we need, some people to speak their language. That's not going to be part of the system yet. That's not going to be an occupation yet. But if you're building spaceships, there are going to be people who make your parts, and there are going to be people who are doing engineering at different levels, and those people, those are occupations that we can have.
Great. Burning questions right now before we move into the reform case for California? All right, we'll have plenty of, oh yes. They will be. On the same site, there's a website that we'll mention at the end. You may have found this event on that website. We'll post them after the event. So yes, the answer is yes. So the reform case, California is actually undergoing all sorts of different efforts in this way. And Bob, do you want to talk a little bit about the California reform case, since you're part of it?
Sure. So,
I'll let you.
well, yeah, let's just stay there. So this is a picture of the CEMETS Institute class that I was in, and actually I'm see my bald spot in the back of my head.
Yeah, that's Bob. Proof that he was there.
With states, with, I think Colorado, and then there were countries from all over the world. And in order to go to the Institute, you must present a reform case. They just don't let anybody in to study. You have to go there to be working on something back at your country or your state. And we went with the idea of advancing the number of youth apprentices in the state of California. I think Vince mentioned 84,000 apprentices in the state of California. And how many youth apprentices?
133 or under 133 individuals.
We know that there is a need for youth apprenticeship in the state of California. And, Vince and Katie asked me to talk about our experience, my experience from the California Workforce Association. And I've been in this industry a long time. I've dealt with work-based learning, earn and learn models for the last 27 years. I have never seen anything like what I witnessed in Zurich with the youth apprenticeship system. To me, it flipped my mind forever on what a youth apprenticeship system could be and should be in California and in our country. And I've had people tell me, well, we're not Switzerland, and we're not Switzerland. However, there are extraordinary lessons to be learned from a country who has embraced work ethic for 70 plus years. And if you think about our publicly funded workforce and education and job training system in this country and the targets that they give to youth, I mean, WIOA just expanded the definition of out-of-school youth to age 24. I don't know about you, but that's an adult, right? But we have young people who graduate from high school at age 18 and spend about 10, 12 years trying to figure out what they want to do for a living, and oftentimes end up in some precarious situations in their life. And then we have to have public benefit, public support come back and really help kind of guide them along. So a couple of things that really struck home. Katie just covered the case for business, right? And why this is good for business. So let's talk a little bit about the individuals. So in Switzerland, 70% of the young people choose choose to go through an apprenticeship route. They don't have to, they choose, right? In Switzerland, I didn't see any homeless people when I went around that country quite a bit in 2 weeks. They don't have a homeless problem. The young people hold themselves in such demeanor of professionalism and with such work ethic that it's very impressive. Of course, they've been working since they were 16, right? And we're not just talking about working at Pump It Up or at Starbucks or as a lifeguard. We're talking about working for companies like the nation's largest telecommunications company, Swisscom. The way I thought about this is Swisscom is kind of like our Comcast, right? It's a huge company. And every year, Swisscom brings in about 900 apprentices. There's an application process that gets vetted out to the system through a career center system. Did I get that right?
Students have access to career guidance and counseling, and that helps them write their applications because it's a real job application, which is scary when you're 15.
Career guidance and counseling, not in the high schools, but
no, it's a separate agency.
Separate agency, which could be like our America's Job Centers of California. I always try to kind of equate this to my mind how things would be here in California. So, so they apply, and 900 get accepted to Swisscom, but it's very competitive. They don't all get accepted. Many of them have to reapply to another company or another apprenticeship opportunity if they don't. Swisscom actually employs vocational counselors, people whose job it is to make sure that the apprentices are learning the work processes and are actually succeeding. So they act as career counselors, case managers inside that company getting paid by Swisscom, right? They make sure that those apprentices are successful and they help them along with support services and all the things they need as young people. At the end of the apprenticeship program, Swisscom retains about 150 of their students, of their apprentices. That means 750 apprentices who are trained are now out in the job market. But they have the opportunity to permeate back into education.
A lot of them pursue higher education because these are very high achieving academic students.
So my understanding is, before we go to the next slide, that when a young person graduates with their apprenticeship program, they can access higher education with minimal hoops to jump through.
And very, very clear hoops. If you do an apprenticeship, you can simultaneously or at any time later with like a 1-year evening school thing, it's called a federal vocational baccalaureate. It's the extra stuff you need to go to university. And with that, you can go directly to a University of Applied Sciences for a bachelor's or master's. If you do that plus the university aptitude test, which is, think like an SAT, then you can go straight into ETH or one of the other university, like the full formal universities. And that's automatic acceptance. It's not then you can apply if you are in. And ETH is the number, I think, 8-ish university in the world. We're not messing around.
So just think about this. I just met a master's degree, a master's student, just graduated with his master's degree in public administration, who wants to be an intern and work for free, and he has no work experience, 0. And I was like, wow, you don't have any work experience. He's like, I went to school in college, on a basketball college scholarship, and I couldn't work and do my basketball and college. You know, so he needs an internship, but it is a different picture in Switzerland. Let's go on to the next slide. Advanced manufacturing. What I want to say about this is that manufacturers in Switzerland, a couple of things. One is, this is not a company-specific apprenticeship program. Here in California, we're like, oh, I have an apprenticeship program with this optometry office over here, and they're going to have 3 apprentices. In Switzerland, it's industry-wide. So it's the manufacturing industry. So in Southern California, you'd be learning process technology. The same curriculum would be taught in San Francisco. That would be ideal. We'd have curriculum portability, and then manufacturers throughout the state of California would oversee and vet this curriculum on a 3 to 5 year rotational basis, right? So this, LIVS, is what I would attribute, it's a professional vocational school. What I would attribute it to be like, would be like a community college. Because as a manufacturer, I don't want a 16-year-old coming right on my shop floor and working all the machinery. I need them to go learn safety, hazmat, and a variety of other skill sets related to manufacturing. So they go to the community that lives for 2 years.
With one key difference.
Yep.
This school is funded by industry.
They're employees.
Right.
So if Bosch Tools brings on an apprentice, they send them to this school for the first year or two while Bosch pays them and pays the school, right?
That's right.
That's right. All right, next, last slide. We also got to go to a banking apprenticeship, which is actually part of their professional commercial employee apprenticeship program. So it's banking, it's professional jobs, right?
Kind of everything like collar.
White
And
collar.
there's sort of, this occupation is so big, it's the biggest occupation in Switzerland, that there's sort of majors within the apprenticeship. So there's like, you can do a commercial apprenticeship in banking, insurance, administration. So it's just every white collar job kind of, but there's 23 majors within that.
But what's really cool here about Challenger Potential in the banking is that the companies are trained to teach and mentor and oversee an apprentice. So, you know, Katie said, not every company should be a training company. The government ensures that the companies know how to train somebody. We have a workforce development apprenticeship program at CWA. We've worked with 2 employers currently. They had to learn a lot about what it meant to oversee an apprentice and turn in their on-the-job training hours and meet work processes, right? Because this is not non-traditional occupation. Same thing here. Those companies are taught how to oversee apprentices, how to hire vocational education specialists. We got to meet 2 young guys who just took their test, their apprenticeship test to get the baccalaureate, which doesn't mean a bachelor's degree, it means a high school diploma,
Yes.
right? So they just took their test, their national test for banking, and we got to interview them, and we asked them, well, what are you going to do next, right? And one was clear. Oh, I'm going to go to the university. That's my path. He was going to go to the higher university.
Traditional university.
Yeah. The other one was hoping that he would stay on at Swiss Bank.
Credit Suisse.
Credit Suisse. And the cool thing was we had some folks from Colorado, and they were like, oh, these poor kids. Like, they miss out on so much of their high school years. What about sports and dances and all of that? So she asked them, what about sports and dances? And they were like, well, sports in Switzerland is club sports. So we don't play sports as part of our high school, but we do play sports, but it's club sports, like our travel ball, right? And then in terms of dances, we can go to clubs at 16 years old. So we have plenty.
Have dances.
Huh?
Schools don't have dances.
They don't have dances.
That'd
They
be
get to go out and dance in the real world like adults, right?
So you just mentioned government,
Yes.
and I get the earlier part of this conversation to the foreground with how market forces make this meaningful, and that you have to have that for quality and for sustainable. Can you say a little bit more about the role of government managing?
Yes, you can.
Can
So
we
the
repeat the
question
question?
was about the role of government in overseeing, managing, making the system work. So Switzerland is a federal situation like the US. There's the federal level, the cantons, which are the size of counties, but it's the equivalent of state. And then there's the local level. When we talk about this in terms of the US, we usually do it up to the state level because that makes sense because states are an entire labor market. And it also makes sense like with the Constitution. So they translate it that way. So the federal government lays out the legal framework for this. It is, you know, there's an act, all acts are part of the Swiss Constitution, the way they do it. There's an act in the Constitution that says there shall be an apprenticeship, a vocational education and training system. It shall be done this way, and every occupation shall have its own ordinance. And every occupation to make, there's 230 options for apprentices at the high school level. And the industry associations representing the entire country come together with education specialists and people from the federal government, and they decide on the competencies, they divide them up, they write the curriculum. The curriculum writing is mainly done by education people because people do what they're good at. You know, the industry people know what should be in it, and the education people know how to turn that into a curriculum. So that's the federal government's role. And then the cantons, again, this will work how it works in California. The cantons are responsible basically for implementation. The cantons are in charge of career guidance and counseling. They organize and pay for their own career guidance and counseling offices. The cantons with the federal government pay for the school part because there is, we've got these 2 learning locations. There's school, which looks just like school. It's English class. The way they do the curriculum, it's, you have this much English class and this much German class and this much, if you're in banking, there might be more economics. If you're in electrician stuff, there might be more physics. But it's still just physics. It's not special physics that aligns perfectly to what you do at work. It's a lot easier than it might seem. And then the cantons are also responsible for sort of quality assurance in terms of making sure that no one's being exploited or abused or any of those bad things. If an apprentice has a problem, they can speak to the canton, or they can speak to any adult who will then speak to the canton, and they'll send out inspectors to make sure it's okay. They also randomly inspect, but there's very rarely problems. But the canton can revoke a company's right to train, and that's kind of a big deal. It really does not look good. And then the cantons in collaboration with the federal government administer exams. So there's a federal exam that everybody takes, but obviously it's not going to be all in the same place. And the exams have both theoretical and practical components. So not only do I need to explain how an electrical socket works theoretically and also pass my English test, I also need to build you an electrical socket or whatever that is. You can tell that I'm an academic, can't you? So let's see, that's most everything. Yeah, that's most everything.
So you can see how the pieces work really well together. And I think when I think about what we created in California, it really, part of it's going to be is how do we strip down some of the things we've built up to allow for more of this flexibility, permeability across labor markets and across our state. So.
And I think one thing that's worth mentioning here as well is, it doesn't sound as if we were, if it sounds to you as if these are these wonderfully well-behaved kids that are just so different, they hate school like they hate school here.
That's why they do apprenticeships.
That's right. And some of the apprentices we interviewed said, what happened for me in that first year is I became an adult because I was treated as an adult. And the expectation were that those of an adult. And one of the kids, I call them kids because they're still young, at this banking center we asked them, what is the highlight of your apprenticeship? And they said, well, I was in the London office and I caught a money launderer at my bank. I was thinking, okay, so he's 17, he was 18, I think, by the time he graduated. And he had the experience of being in another desk and actually being part of catching money laundering. That's pretty good. That's adult stuff. And of course, he loved the experience, and he was turned on to being being in this profession. So I think that's something we caught across the board is this experience of changing your role in life from that of a kid to that of an adult by way of the workplace.
Right.
So we're still on the reform case.
Oh, sorry, I talked too much. California,
No.
Let's do this.
Yes. So again, question. Sam.
Before you move on, can you share a little bit? I was in Switzerland. I was visiting friends in the summer, and I got to see some things firsthand. Can you share a little bit of that culturally? The young people actually compete to be in the apprentice program. Part of the culture, it's a rigorous competition because they want to be there.
So the question is about how you've been to Switzerland and you saw some of the system firsthand. And the question is about how young people feel about apprenticeships. Is this a status thing? And how you saw young people competing to be in an apprenticeship because it's a big deal. And yeah, that's absolutely true. You were talking about Swisscom. Statistically, you're less likely to get an apprenticeship at SCOM than you are to get into Harvard. It's statistically, there's a lot under that. But apprenticeships they're a status option. It's not a matter of, oh, you didn't get the grades. There's no cutoff test or anything like that. People choose to do this because they want to, and it's an exciting option. A lot of people see it as the no-fail option. Like you go to academic high school and you screw up, you're kind of in trouble because there's a lot of studies, especially out of the research lab of Dr. Bacchus-Gellner at University of Zurich, and they've looked at the returns to education for different people who have different degrees and different experiences and stuff like that. And the people who just do academic high school and then stop, they are in trouble. That's not a good place to be. And that's like being an American high school dropout. There's nothing for them, really. A lot of them have to go back and sort of do most of an apprenticeship again, because if you don't go to university, what was the point of academic high school? So
There's also,
Yeah. Share a little bit about that in Switzerland, there's actually labor market data among youth employment and unemployment.
So the question is about labor market data systems, and in Switzerland and in most other countries, sorry, the US is a little behind on this one, there's very extensive and clear labor market data, not only for youth specifically, but also for indicators like obviously unemployment and employment, but things like in-work at risk of poverty rates and skills mismatch rates, formal education and training rates. We have something called the Youth Labor Market Index that has 12 dimensions and covers all of those things, and we're able to do it for almost every country except the US because the US doesn't collect the data. And I'm not supposed to talk more about it, but you're right. Data is really important. Go ahead.
and on the civic pride thing, one thing that we noticed was, the way we celebrate in a small town, high school graduation, for example. What happens in Switzerland, my hometown newspaper has a little supplement, and it shows the companies, they advertise and say, here are the 5 apprentices that we graduated this year. And there's the same kind of civic pride attached, and companies actually take great pride, and it's a way to advertise what a good employer they are, which also makes people feel good about them. So enough said about that. California, we're talking about California. It matters, it doesn't matter that much what Switzerland does for the future of California, except, as Bob mentioned, for the lessons we can learn from it. So part of the mission that we're on in Switzerland this summer was to come up with ways in which we could translate this to California. And there's a lot of people who contributed to this thinking. So we were not alone in this, and including the people there in the room, other people who have participated. I want to name a few of them in California in testing out different models over the last decade and more are part of it. So here is an attempt at taking the Swiss model and figuring out could that look like in California. Usually when you look at the Swiss model, it goes up and there's an academic side to it, and there's a apprenticeship vocational education side to it. We put it sideways for a number of reasons that I won't go into because it gets complicated. But there are basically 2 sides to this potential system for California, the dual path and the single path. The dual path is what we would think of as the vocational path with an apprenticeship at its core. And the single path is what we currently offer, which is essentially, K through 10 or K through 12. And then for those who go on, college at various levels all the way up to, on the far right there, the PhD and postgraduate work. So the idea here is on the upper side, if you look at it again from left to right, the dual path would split your time in the 11th and 12th grade of high school between work-based education and school-based education. So classic model, exact same idea as they do in Switzerland, as they do in South Carolina and Wisconsin and a few places. And that's they're trying to, or not trying, they're really standing it up in Colorado. So Colorado's ahead of us in that way. And the idea would be 11th and 12th grade, if we took the model, say, from South Carolina, 11th and 12th grade are part school, part work, and 1 year of community college added gets you a complete apprenticeship with a certificate in whatever occupation that apprenticeship is offered in. It gets you a high school diploma, and it gets you probably an associate degree in science or arts, depending on what it is. Again, this is after 2 or 3, it's probably a 3-year apprenticeship at that point. In the place, and you actually get interviewed and you for this apprenticeship. You get an income, you get a training wage, just like you do currently in Switzerland, or as I said, in South Carolina. And then, and the permeability that Katie talks about, that's the dotted line. So that means you can go back and forth in both directions between a non-apprenticeship path to an apprenticeship path and back. And of course, to the right, and this is where California has some advantages to some states that don't have this, there's a professional university system already in place. Obviously, there's community colleges everywhere in place. And so this idea of training opportunities at the classroom level, both for high school, post-high school, and then for advanced training, they're there. They're just not necessarily always articulated well into a system that makes everyone understand, okay, this is how I get to where I want to be, and this is how I can have that income. So this is a very simplified drawing that's meant to describe what such a dual educational system could look like for California. And if you want to read more about it, you could
change the slide.
Change the slides. It might be just a little slow because we had a, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to switch.
There's
That's
a new report out today, written by one Vince Kohler.
Well, it's obviously not cooperating, but it is a fact, once the slide changes, that the sort of summary of both the model and the current system in California is summarized in a white paper that just came out coincidentally today, that was developed in partnership with Jobs for the Future. It was funded by the James Irvine Foundation and Salesforce. And it also included work from my colleague over here, Annalise Goger, who contributed through especially through the work on her study of ETP, and then other colleagues at SPR, whose indulgence I'm really appreciative of when I go on the soapbox for apprenticeship. The two things I want to mention in terms of where we are in California is we're not starting from scratch. I think are you able to advance on your side? Because my internet connection might be down. Okay. It's not, yeah.
What's the feedback you're getting from the high schools? I know in my kids' high school,
Right.
they're going the opposite direction. They're requiring more college-based learning for every kid in high school, no matter what.
Right.
They're actually increasing by 2 more classes. If they maybe want to take a CE track, they still have to take an extra class of science and foreign language.
So it's been pretty interesting. You know, Vince and I and several other folks have been kind of going around the state of California talking to folks interested in starting youth apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs generally. And we find that you don't need an entire school district. You need a school to be interested in doing this. There's we feel like we get better response when there's a block system in play. So when the high school's on a block system, that enables juniors and seniors a little bit more free time that they can devote to work. The tricky part has been the credits. Like, can we give them credit for working? And people are trying to work that through now. You want to add to that?
Well, I think what we found, what this allows us to do, this kind of a system allows schools to do, is to meet their CT credits requirements, which is not necessarily always easy for every school. One of the key mapping issues, and this is far from complete, this development of a consistent model and a system, what we have to also work on is make sure that A through G graduation requirements are also covered. And this is where I would like to add to something that's described in detail in the paper, and I won't be able to do it justice here, is that, again, we're not starting from scratch. A lot of work has been done on work-based education, on linked learning, as an example, of really making sure that we understand that academics and vocational is not in contradiction with each other, it's supportive of each other. And this idea of a pathway to higher education through an apprenticeship is not an alternative to college. It's another way to get there as you need to or as you want to. And the key difference, and I was doing a presentation in Bakersfield sitting next to a trainer of electricians, ironically, again, electricians are with us, and he said that his son just finished his college degree with a debt of $70,000 and was now starting an electrician apprenticeship in order to pay off his college debt. And I was thinking, and we were talking about, shouldn't we just flip the model and say, why don't you get
And I think
get the work skill first and the earning power? Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the K through 12 is a super tanker that doesn't turn very fast.
yeah, and I really do think that we have to build upon what we've already started and what we know in the state. You know, the fact that we had a significant investment from the state of California on the Career Pathways Trust, for example, which allowed schools to connect high school juniors and seniors to industry. That's not enough. That's not apprenticeship, right? That's exposing. It's like sniffing in Switzerland, where they are exposed to different careers. But at a very young age in Switzerland, we were taking juniors and seniors and doing that. But I have met with people who say, well, we do that. We have CTE. We have internships. We do work experience. But those are all very different than what we're talking about here. This is a complete system that I think if we look at the nuances of, will allow us things like portable curriculum across colleges and high schools. It will allow industry to invest in workforce development and job training. It will allow for dual credit to be achieved on a systematic level. So,
and I think one of the things that I go into more detail in the paper is this idea that you have two choices as to how you expose a youth to the workplace. You can either bring the workplace into schools, or you can take the youth and bring them into the workplace. It turns out, I mean, both are valid, but there are, if you ask an economist, there's huge differences in what happens, whether you choose one or the other. And there's some, and putting the burden of actually recreating a workplace in schools is actually, it's just not sustainable, is what we're finding. So, you know, the CNC machine is just one example, but there are numerous examples. And so very, very good efforts that are actually happening in career academies around the state they can only get us so far. They cannot get us all the way. And that's where I think the idea of actually taking the youth into the workplace and actually having them earn money and having the employer, you know, be a producer is kind of key for the question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. Yes. I'll try and keep them real quick. The first one, it seems like what this would do is it would, to an extent, deal with the 30-point drop-off between people who graduate a four-year high school and the college matriculation rate. I'm curious about whether there's a plan to triage the final 2 years of high school into other curricula when dealing with that, considering we include most of our civic education in the U.S. in the final 2 years of high school. That's my first question. My second question is the role of trade associations in the U.S. has tended to be very different. They tend to view themselves as advocacy organizations as opposed to standard-setting organizations or self-governing organizations. So how do you propose that shift?
Okay, you want me to go?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing that I'd add. I'd like you to be on that commission that has to be formed to make that happen, because that's the kind of information and knowledge and understanding that needs to be there when this gets worked out. But Katie has the answer.
Okay, we have a three-part question, and I'm going to go fast because I know we're running low on time. Yeah. First part of the question is, how do we deal with the drop-off between people who do graduate high school but do not complete a bachelor's degree? There's a lot of stuff inside that. Part of it is people affording college. Part of it is people having the skills they need after high school to actually complete college, being really college ready. And part of it is people actually, whether or not they actually need a college degree. It helps if the people who are pursuing a college degree are really people who need it. You know, if your goal occupation is something where you need a degree, it really helps. That's a really good reason to do it. There's also the issue, it's not necessarily a bad thing that not a ton of people get a college degree. We don't want everyone to get one. We need more than 12%. But for me, a big part of the solution is making sure that what you get every time is valuable. To me, the bigger concern is what happens to people who only have a high school degree. And also all of our high school dropouts. And part of what contributes to that is making sure that there is something that people want to complete. In Switzerland, about 20 years ago, they had a crisis on the apprenticeship market. Nobody was signing up for it because all of a sudden university was way more valuable, and the system wasn't permeable. The Swiss system is not set in stone. It hasn't been the way it is forever. And they did a ton of reforms to create those pathways and clear crosswalks. And the graduation rate went up by 10% because of that. So a lot of it is making sure that the pathways that are actually available to people are something they want. If I'm going to college and I'm studying English literature, no offense to English literature majors, I couldn't think of something no one majored in, then I might realize halfway through that I'm wasting my time. And that would be a good reason to drop out. And it might actually, economically speaking, be a good choice. So making sure that when people are getting degrees, they're actually degrees that they should be getting and that they need and stuff like that. And making sure they're ready for college when they start again.
Yeah, let me just add that, if I think we'd fare better if in high school we allowed young people to explore career options and had clear pathways tied to those options, as to where you should go to get this education. Because right now, if you think about the work high school students do, they can do a lot of work and still graduate high school and have very little work experience. And even more important, have very little knowledge of what they want to do. So many of them go to college just because they've been groomed to go to college, not because they know what they want to do.
And
Okay.
I guess there's one other thing, and that is that we have turned the degree into a filter because we don't have anything else.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the problem.
Getting a degree means you're work ready.
Right. So if you look at sort of the work of Professor Fuller at Harvard Business School, what he's done around the degree gap, this is really interesting information that says, employers screen for a degree because that's what they have. And it's not a good predictor, but it's the best they have because other things are missing. So I think a lot of work needs to be done in order to make that happen as a system. And one thing that struck me about the Swiss system is that actually it's relatively simple. It's hard to get there, but it's not that complicated, the system. Whereas I've been working for 20 to almost 30 years now in the US system, and I have to say I still don't get it.
All right, there's
Two
two
or
more
three
parts.
Yes,
Two more parts.
please.
First one was what happens with civic education. Basically, what happens with all the stuff that people are learning in 11th and 12th grades. And the answer to that is they're still going to school in 11th and 12th grades. So maybe because they've chosen an occupational curriculum, if they're not doing that sort of extra vocational baccalaureate, they might not be doing, if you're doing banking, you might not be taking a lot of advanced biology classes because you're focusing on economics and stuff and then what you learn in school. There is every apprentice in Switzerland takes a sort of civic life class, and it does all the balance your checkbooks, do your taxes. They vote a ton. They have so many votes because everything is a national reference. It's like direct democracy, but like times 10. And so how to be a good citizen, how to interpret news articles and which sources count, all those things you wish you learned in high school, like how to finance buying, a life. So that sort of stuff happens, but you have to choose what to put into the curriculum. And there's this balance between more and more occupational stuff and the general stuff that you need to get through life, the general being broadly applicable. And so that, you're right, that has to be in there. And I would say that, especially in a context where we have a lot of high school dropouts and a lot of people who are not at grade level, our civic education is probably worse off for having people just sleeping through high school than it would be through having them intentionally participate in a class like that. Last bit is the role of trade associations. You are absolutely right. The trade associations in the US are very different from industry associations in Switzerland. And there's a big question right now that's sort of playing out in Colorado is, are those associations going to step up and start representing the needs of industries, or will something else, a new intermediary, build up to fill that space? It's not totally clear yet, but once companies are sort of start piloting this and started having experience with training, they realize that they have very strong opinions about what's in the curriculum and they start to advocate. And maybe they'll start coming together, maybe they will come to the table individually. Whatever it is, someone has to be at the table, but it's not going to be the same set of institutions as it is in Switzerland. So yes, someone has to be there. Trade associations in the US are not generally ready for that. And it's a question of who it's going to be.
And I think it fundamentally is a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. We don't have some of those roles covered because we haven't had those roles be occupied. I want to get through a couple more things about the Institute coming up, and then we have some more time for questions, but I want to make sure that those of you who wanted to hear that covered, as my system is once again not cooperating, I just want to mention the point of putting a delegation together for the Summer Institute in 2019. So let me see if I can advance the slides now. Yes, look at that. Very briefly, what would, again, this is covered in the paper in more detail, what would youth apprenticeship at scale look like in California? We could reach 800,000 apprentices. That is not unrealistic. Again, this is kind of extrapolating both from a work that has been done by Burning Glass and Harvard on what the capacity is of the labor market to absorb apprentices, but also on what we see in mature systems. And there's a lot of money to be made doing this, both by the individuals who go through apprenticeships, by the companies that employ apprentices, and by reducing student debt, which is at a crisis level, and is actually at a crisis level. I just saw in Fortune is at the crisis level for the economy as a whole. So, yeah, okay. And finally, and of course, it is a partnership. This requires a partnership. We can't get into enough detail. That's why you have to. For some reason, it just does not want to advance. So I have to take it off again. So the Summer Institute, let's see.
Shall I talk about what the Summer Institute is?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so the Summer Institute is an annual event that we have. It's 10 days from the end of June to the beginning of July every year. And it's our opportunity to talk to countries and states that are interested in doing this. There's a ton of research being done in Switzerland at ETH, the University of Zurich, and the University of Bern on this. And basically, there were so many people who wanted to come and talk to us that it became unbearable, and we couldn't do any actual work. So now we have an institute where we do all of you at once. And we accept 10 teams every year from, like I said, we've worked with about 30 different countries. We're on every continent except for Antarctica. And we're working on it. Maybe we can get a penguin. But this is our chance to share what we know. What I've just said is about like half of a baby bit of a percent of all the stuff that we do. It's intense. Don't come if you're like, don't come for vacation. We don't let you do anything fun, sorry. We now give you Sunday off, that's new. But it's a very intense experience. You see what other countries are doing. It's a really exciting thing to see, especially for the American teams, to see what's going on in developing countries and emerging markets, because a lot of those countries are way ahead of us, especially countries that maybe have the traditional apprenticeship system sort of still around, and they're able to convert that into something formal, whereas we have to sort of go backwards and start again. So it's really exciting to see in the exchange, and you'll see some countries are further ahead, and you're like, ooh, we got to worry about that. Some countries are maybe behind where you are, and you're like, oh, wow, I don't know if we have that foundational thing. It's a really valuable experience. You get to do site visits and see all those places they were just talking about. We get in a lot of professors who've been doing research on this for decades to come and tell you all their stuff. Dr. Bacchus-Gellner from the University of Zurich talks about the returns to individuals, companies, and the economy for having apprenticeships like this, and what the determinants are of that, and from all of those points of view. My professor, Ursula Reynolds, talks about her experience running the Swiss system. She was responsible for those reforms that I talked about a minute ago. And also our team's experience of working with countries and states as they implement systems like this. We know it's good to get to the end point, but what does it take to get from here to there? And then Dr. Schiffenbolter is sort of the global expert on that cost benefit, ROI for firms stuff. And he talks about not only that study, but also a whole lot of nuances that frankly, it's amazing that he even thinks of them. And it's a wonderful experience. We also, you get to work with young researchers. We use it as a screening method. We won't work directly with countries or states until they have come to the Institute, because we don't have time. And yeah, it's a valuable experience. We hope you can come, but space is extremely limited because we can't have 1 billion people, because then we can't go on site visits. So we only accept 10 teams. There's only 1 team coming from California. We won't accept 2. And only 10 people can be on that team. So we want people who are representing industry as well as education and policymaking and intermediaries. We want people who expect to have a real role in the system moving forward. People who, when they're at the Institute, can actually make plans and decisions, and maybe you don't have ultimate authority, but you can make commitments to a certain degree. And we're going to do this, we're going to try to move forward with this, and we can actually expect to move forward when we get home. We want people who are excited about this. We were talking about the Coalition of the Willing earlier. People who, it's great to convince the people who aren't very excited about this, but we just need to get started. And for the pilot years, it's the Coalition of the Willing. And also it helps if you're planning to be in the industry for a while or planning to do this for a while. It's probably not the ideal retirement trip.
Yeah, and you know, one of the key facets is it's amazing how it you get a lot of lecture and a lot of knowledge, but it's also very interactive. So when you present your reform case to the entire study hall, the entire lecture hall, people from other countries and states get a chance to ask you questions and actually comment on your reform case in a very strong way.
And you'll be expected to do the same for others.
And you'll be expected. And you know, like
reform.
we had to answer what is the question they're trying to solve. And with, you know, Dr. Ursula saying, no, I don't think that's it. What's the problem? Dig deeper, dig deeper. And it's just truly an incredible experience.
You want to say something about cost?
Oh, it costs,
Something.
for a group of your size, it costs 7,000 Swiss francs per person. That includes tuition, hotels, food, transportation within Zurich. You have to fly there. And if you have any extra hotel nights, we'll help you organize them, but you have to pay for them, obviously. That is, frankly, a really good deal. We're cheap, but it's because we want people to be able to come. We spend, I think we break even every year, barely, because things are expensive in Switzerland and we're feeding 60 people every day.
I mean, it's 10 days.
It's 10 days,
10 days.
and that's everything. We don't want cost to be a factor in preventing people from coming, especially when we have people like from developing countries and stuff. So yes, it costs 7,000 per person, but that is so very worth it. And I know I'm biased, but
It's about the same.
oh, sorry. US Swiss francs. I think right now it's exactly the same.
Oh, really? Okay.
But it's usually within like 2%.
All right. I want to mention a few of our friends who also contributed in so many different ways, both to the system overall and have very exciting things happening. So for one thing, New America has recently launched their partnership for the advancement of youth apprenticeship. And there's going to be an announcement, and I think we have Brent Parton on the line with us, although he can hear us, but we can't hear him. With an announcement, they've recently launched this partnership, and there will be an RFP coming out that really is supporting the development of youth apprenticeship systems because there's a recognition that this is very much in need. Obviously, ETH Zurich is a friend partner. I want to mention the Foundation for California Community Colleges in particular because they've been both partnering with us at SPR, with CWA, on supporting the California Apprenticeship Initiative grants, which have piloted apprenticeship in non-traditional occupations throughout the state, apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship. So again, we don't have to start from scratch. Models have been developed. It's a question of bringing them to scale. And last but definitely not least, our friends at JFF, their new Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, full of good resources, including a wonderful new paper that just came out today that's housed there. And the folks there under the leadership of Eric Sells now are really moving mountains to, again, spread the word. And one thing I want to mention, I didn't mention this at the beginning as what's auspicious about being in December of 2018 talking about this. It is a very different discussion than we've had even a year ago or 2 years ago. And I feel like this idea has arrived, and it is no longer some kooky idea that other people do in other countries, but it is really something that's recognized for its potential to solve a huge issue that we have, this talent gap and the opportunity gap and the distribution of opportunity that's not very even in our society. And this is as close to panacea to actually address this as I've ever found in my research, and it is not easy to accomplish for sure. And if I think of putting a delegation together of 10 people for the state of California with its number of colleges and systems, and you talked about the K through 12 system, this is challenging.
The Institute happens every year.
It happens every year, and I can tell you that, well, you should talk about, Colorado's been going for 4 years? 5 years? 4 years?
What year is it? 4, yes.
Yeah, for as long as it exists, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, and they bring new people. So this is sort of a little bit of
Onboarding.
progressive, a
Yeah.
progressive party, if you will. And so it doesn't, not everything gets accomplished in the first year. And most of the time horizons for these efforts are 10 years or so of actually translating this into, and for and that was also the governor's goal, was to get to 500,000. I didn't mention a timeline, but it was by 2029. So that's basically 10
You were
years.
going to say 2020 and I almost died.
Yeah, no, not
Okay.
2020, 2029.
You have a question in the back.
Yes. So now we time for questions.
So,
5 minutes.
so yeah, it was me, Vince, and a gentleman named David Spar
Spar.
from Monterey County Economic Development. We were like the advanced scouts. We actually tried to pull a team together. As Vince said, this is a very different conversation today. We had a lot of interest, but nobody who was willing to pony up the funds or get the approval to travel out of state or country.
It's 10 days. So it's a commitment. And it's almost always over 4th of July weekend. And you don't get to
It
pay
was
off.
over 4th of July. That's
And the
true.
World Cup was going on. So
But that's fun. That's a bonus.
yes.
Yeah, and again, like if you think you're going to bring your wife and go visit and tour chateaus and all of that, it's not happening.
Didn't happen for
I didn't bring my
Bob.
wife, so yeah.
Any other questions? We have a few more minutes.
I just wanted an observation. So, one of the technical very interesting. But they would have to have a really solid business case.
Yeah.
So, I was just curious, like in the past symposium, what is, like, for an employer, what would be specifically the business case?
That's pretty good.
More about it.
You want to? You're very good.
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on their, oh, sorry, I forgot to repeat the question. It's talking about what is the business case for employers, especially in the tech sector. It's going to depend on what they need in terms of skills. Generally, the companies that we find are the first to jump on the bandwagon, as it were, are companies that are having a hard time finding the skills that they need. And not just very specific, like we are, Joe's hardware company, we want people who know how to use Joe's hardware, but also all those employability skills, all the things that we were talking about in this entire thing. So companies who need some kind of skill that they're having a hard time finding, those are usually the first to come on board because it's very obvious to them that they need the help. In terms of the business case, the heart of it is that cost-benefit analysis, is that we are earning money by participating in this. But we've also seen, for example, Zurich Insurance is working on a project. Where is it? They're all over the country. They're working on a project in I want to say Illinois. And it's in cooperation with community colleges, and it's an adult apprenticeship. But they've seen not only the apprentices themselves, but they've seen massive improvements in like morale, because people are so excited to participate in mentorship and to have new people who are so excited for the opportunity to be there. If you're working in your insurance company every day and then someone comes in and sits next to you who's like, I'm so grateful to be here. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Then you're like, this is pretty cool. They asked for 4 mentors and they got 80 responses, things like that. There's a lot of sort of less quantifiable. We are about to initiate a formal cost benefit study of the stuff going on in Colorado, and we'll have much clearer information then. At this point, we don't have any American data, obviously. But the heart of it is that return on investment. And I would say in terms of convincing companies, there need to be pilots. We have to pilot this. And that is, when you're looking towards a statewide architecture, we're working on a curriculum that makes sense everywhere, so the structure being something that's applicable statewide, and the people who've been to the Summer Institute are prepared to discuss what that means. But it's like, okay, let's do 20 apprentices. Let's in one occupation in your company and maybe one other company, same occupation. Let's see how it works. Let's run them through for 3 or 4 years. And tech companies have spent a lot more money on weird ideas than they would paying 20 high school students for 4 years.
And I think the other example, examples like that, for example, in Colorado, they went from, 6 industries with maybe 10 businesses per, and they ended up moving to now more than 100 companies. So it's a curve that starts with the coalition of the willing. Some see it right off the bat. Others need to be persuaded and join later. It's like a bit like a new early adoption of a new device.
But I think that's true. I think that's going to be the key, is we're going to have some businesses be leaders of this early adoption. What we've heard up to now, there's significant concerns about, you're talking about an industry rather than me as one employer. What about the bureaucracy in terms of the Department of Industrial Standards, the Department of Labor? We also heard issues around liability and my insurance in terms of workers' comp and those kind of things. So we will have to work with business to address those.
And I just have
an online question that Annalise has been tracking.
Yeah, we have a few questions and comments. So someone said, is it $7,000 for the total price of the institute with the exception of airfare?
Yes,
Yes.
$7,000, but you have to buy a plane ticket.
Yes. And then in tech, someone made a comment, Lauren from SAP. In tech, we are looking for diverse talent, and we can find it through apprenticeships. So the diversity problem, underrepresented populations, that's another incentive. And then Eric Levine said, said Schaumburg, Illinois for Zurich Insurance.
That's right.
Thank you so much. I knew you would know that.
Harper College, Schaumburg, Illinois.
I'm the only one who doesn't know that.
Eric Levine is another advocate for, he and his wife were in Switzerland. She was the ambassador to Switzerland, so she's a big advocate for that.
This is terrific. Like, just to feedback on Phil. So here in San Francisco, we have SF Tech. And one of the things that we're learning over the last several years is that, particularly in Silicon Valley, you do have a culture by which folks in Cornell, MIT, NYU, Columbia will travel to California and work for free after their bachelor's or their master's, or even their PhD. That is a culture that exists. The idea of penetrating, going deeper into youth apprenticeship is all intents and purposes, is a European concept, not a natural for the American sector. But I applaud it because it's where we should have been years ago. So thank you for really bringing this up.
Thanks.
Yes.
So the comment is that the spirit is good, but the premise may be European. And that the point that you made that I really liked is that there are some occupations here in Silicon Valley where people with advanced degrees are coming out to California to work for free. And how can an apprentice compete with that? It's the sort of unspoken part of that question. And the answer is, that's not the right place to start. You see this in Spain, actually. They have a massive youth unemployment crisis because they never really recovered from the recession. And it's like 50%, it's real bad. And one of the things that people have done while they're unemployed is go to school more. And if you go to Spain, your bank teller might have a PhD in banking or finance or something like that. And as a result, Stefan Bolcher did a study with them looking at sort of simulating what could possibly work for Spain. And while there were some occupations where the recommendation was, yes, apprenticeship is great here, in banking and finance, no, because there's no need for it. We don't do supply side policy. We're past that. It's not the 1980s anymore. We look for demand. So if there's no need for it, don't do it.
So we have a few more questions. I just want to let the online audience know we've reached that point. And what I would like to do is we're going to be here. Katie is here. If you have that question, let's have her answer it one-on-one. We will post the slides and all other resources on the same website that's up on the screen right now at spra.com/CEMETS-2019, where you will also find, and this might be of interest to those of you who are interested in joining the delegation, very soon a application where you can submit your interest and you know, of participating in the Summer Institute in 2019. We're going to do that together with CWA.
Right.
So thank you all for being online. Thank you to Eddie Ortiz at SPR for managing the back end to all of this, and to Annalise, who's been monitoring the questions, and of course to my panelists, Bob Lanter and Katie Caves.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.